Get your hands off her, Dad. After what you've done, you don't get to touch her. That's the phrase that blew apart 50 years of my life. 50 years of Sunday dinners, mortgage payments, and the quiet, solid certainty that I knew the man sitting across from me. I, Eleanor Hayes, Ellie to my friends, Nana to my 2 grandbabies. I'm 73 now, and I can tell you, you think you've seen it all until your own daughter looks at her father like he's a stranger dredged up from the bottom of the sea. It was a Sunday, of course. Always a Sunday. The house on Maple Street, my house, our house, the one Arthur and I had bought with scraped-together savings when Clara was still in diapers, smelled like rosemary and desperation. Desperation because I'd spent the whole afternoon trying to perfect a new bechamel sauce for the scalloped potatoes, and I'd nearly burned it twice. The table was set with the old linen cloth, the one with the faint yellow stain I swear no amount of bleach will ever conquer. Clara, my eldest, 32 now, sharp-tongued and quicker than a whip, was home visiting with her brother Daniel, who'd driven down from the city. Daniel, bless his careful soul, was already easing back a chair, his eyes scanning the food like a hungry hawk. Arthur, my Arthur, was at the kitchen island, a picture of calm predictability, meticulously trimming the fat from the roast before carrying it to the dining room. Everything was precisely as it should be. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a ball game on the radio, the clinking of silverware as Daniel fiddled with his napkin. Normal, comforting, a thick, warm blanket of routine I'd woven over 7 decades. I'd just sat down, my favorite heavy fork in my hand, ready to spear the first perfect crispy corner of the roast when Clara placed her palms flat on the wood. Not gentle palms, not the hands of a woman who was just resting. These were hands that delivered a blow. Clang. The sound was like a gunshot in the cozy room. It wasn't the sound of an accidental bump. It was deliberate, resonant. The crystal salt cellar, a wedding gift from my late sister, actually jumped. The dog, a fluffy mutt named Barnaby, who'd been snoozing under the sideboard, let out a startled bark and skittered off to the hall. My heart lurched, catching somewhere in my throat, tasting like burnt flour. I looked at Clara, my beautiful reserved daughter. Her face, usually pale, was flushed crimson, and her eyes, oh, her eyes, they were blazing with a cold, terrifying clarity I'd never seen aimed at us. "Clara? What in heaven's name—" Arthur started, his voice rumbling with confusion and the quiet authority he rarely had to use anymore. He reached out, not to scold, but just to touch her arm, perhaps to ground her. That's when she said it, the phrase that broke the clock. "Get your hands off her, Dad. After what you've done, you don't get to touch her." The words were not loud, not a yell. They were low, measured, and utterly lethal. They didn't hang in the air. They simply replaced the air, leaving us breathless. Arthur's hand froze an inch from her sleeve. Daniel, usually the first to defuse a crisis with a dry, self-deprecating joke, simply stared, a piece of roast halfway to his open mouth. And me? I didn't feel anger or even immediate hurt. I felt a sudden seismic shift beneath my feet, the kind that tells you the solid ground you thought you stood on has just become quicksand. Done what? Touch who? She looked from her father to me, and back again, her gaze holding a dark, complex pity that was far worse than pure fury. I looked at Arthur, my steady, reliable, utterly predictable husband, 74 years old, a retired accountant who spent his days puttering in the garden and solving cryptic crosswords. He was the pillar. He was the one who remembered where I put my reading glasses. He was the keeper of our history. His face was slack, drained of all color, the rosy hue he'd gotten from roasting the meat completely gone. His eyes, though, were what stopped my breath. They weren't confused, nor were they angry. They were defeated, and worst of all, they were guilty. "Eleanor," he whispered, and the sound of my full name in that room felt like the final snap of a frayed wire. "Eleanor, No!" Clara interrupted, cutting him off with the precision of a surgeon's knife. "Don't you dare start with the excuses. It's too late for that. You know I know, and I know she doesn't." She tipped her head toward me, a slow, agonizing movement. "Tell her, Dad, you owe her that much before she sits down to eat your roast chicken." My 73 years flashed before me. Not the highlights, but the little, forgettable moments that now suddenly gained the weight of gold. The way he always checked the locks twice before bed. The time he insisted we must refinance the house despite having perfectly stable finances. The week he went silent when his old business partner, Mr. Henderson, died unexpectedly. Now, they felt less like idiosyncrasies and more like fragments of a carefully managed performance. I finally found my voice, a thin, reedy sound that didn't belong to the woman who organized charity drives and shouted at the television news. "Clara," I said, my hand trembling as I reached for the gravy boat, "you are being cruel, unfair. If there is something to say, you will say it civilly, or you will leave the table. Do you hear me? This is your father. I don't know what you've cooked up in your head, but—" Arthur's hand came down, a mirror of Clara's own slam, but softer, on the table edge. A plea, not an attack. "Eleanor, stop." His voice was hoarse, a throat full of dust. He looked straight at me, past the shock, past the chicken, straight into the place where my soul sat. "She's right, she knows something, and I should have told you years ago." Now that was the shocker. Not Clara's tantrum, which I could eventually categorize as a young woman's stress, but Arthur's quiet, immediate capitulation. It was the confirmation that turned my stomach to ice. The man who never admitted to losing a chess game, let alone a fight with the bank, was admitting to a secret so profound it had earned the rage of his daughter. Daniel, who'd been silent, finally put his fork down with a gentle clink. "Clara, you have to talk." "What is this? What is Dad supposed to have done? Is it about the house?" "The house." That was Daniel's guess. We'd had a small scare 2 years ago when the property taxes went up unexpectedly. Arthur had handled it with his usual brisk efficiency, but Daniel, a lawyer himself, had been suspicious of the swiftness with which the issue was settled. Clara just laughed, a dry, horrible sound that lacked any trace of mirth. "The house? Oh, Daniel, the house is just the wallpaper on a much, much bigger mural. No, this is about the foundation, about who we are, about the life Mom thinks she's lived." She turned her gaze back to me. The pity was still there, now overlaid with a raw sorrow. "I didn't mean to find out, Mom. It was an accident. I was trying to find your old will, the one with the charity bequest, and I found the box." The box. Everyone in the family knew about the box. A heavy antique cedar chest that sat in the attic, tucked behind the old baby clothes. It held the important documents, birth certificates, marriage licenses, my grandmother's prayer book, and the various iterations of our wills. It was Arthur's domain, the keeper of our history. "You went through my things?" Arthur finally had a flicker of anger, a defensive reflex. "I went through our things." "The family things," Clara retorted. I needed to see if it was true. If what I found on his old work laptop was really what I thought it was, and it was, the laptop, Arthur's old, bulky accounting laptop, which he had always guarded fiercely, even after retiring. He claimed he kept old client files on it for archival purposes, but now the hair on the back of my neck stood up, prickling with dread. Why hadn't he simply wiped it? "I don't know what you found, Clara," I said, and my voice was steadier this time, bolstered by the need to understand. I pushed my plate away. The roast chicken suddenly looked repulsive, the skin glistening with oil, like a mirror reflecting a truth I didn't want to see. "But whatever it is, it's not going to be worse than the past hour of this emotional terrorism. If you're going to accuse your father of something, you will use your adult words and tell me precisely what you mean, now." I stared her down, the mother looking at the daughter, demanding the respect that 73 years of living and loving and sacrificing had earned. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It wasn't thick with shock. It was sharp, like a shard of broken glass. Clara looked at her father, then at me, and sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of years. "It's not about an affair, Mom," she said, anticipating my inner fear, the cliché of the elderly cheating husband. "It's about money, yes, but not a simple bad investment. It's about a name, a name." I wrinkled my brow, trying to recall any name that Arthur had ever shielded from me. His life was an open book. We had joint accounts, joint investments, and even filed our taxes together. Every client, every colleague, every acquaintance had always been a shared piece of information. The name of the company he dissolved, The one he claimed was just a consultancy side gig before he retired, Clara explained, her voice gaining a cold, professional edge, almost like Daniel's in a courtroom. It was called Seraphim Holdings. Remember that, Dad? You told me you liquidated it 5 years ago. Arthur didn't move. He stood like a marble statue, trapped by his own deception. Well, it wasn't liquidated, Clara continued. It was transferred. To a trust. A trust set up in Belize, Mom. And you know whose name is listed as the sole primary beneficiary of that trust? She didn't wait for an answer. She simply delivered the blow. Mine. I blinked. Once, twice. The information didn't compute. It was nonsensical. A financial trust in Belize, with Clara as the sole beneficiary. Why? Why would Arthur hide a massive foreign asset and name Clara to receive it, all while keeping me, his wife, completely in the dark? Clara, I started, a wave of dizziness washing over me. Are you saying your father was hiding money from the government? And he set you up to be the recipient? No, Mom. Worse, she whispered. He set me up to be the heir. But not his heir. She stood up and walked around the table to the small antique hutch where I kept my fine china. She opened the top drawer, the one reserved for the important paperwork I rarely touched, and pulled out an envelope. It was sealed, addressed to Eleanor Hayes, and written in Arthur's steady, familiar cursive. I found this in the box, too, tucked under your marriage certificate, Clara said, handing it to me. I didn't open it. I wouldn't. But I think it's time you read it. I took the envelope. It felt heavy, filled with the lead weight of unspoken words. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Arthur used for formal letters. I looked at my husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for 50 years, and saw a stranger. Arthur, I said, my voice dangerously calm. If you don't tell me what is in this letter right now, I will assume the worst possible scenario. And that scenario involves calling the police. He finally moved, shaking his head slowly, a tear tracing a single, devastating path down his cheek. He looked utterly broken. It's not illegal, Eleanor. I promise you that. It's just the truth. The truth I tried to hide to protect us. To protect you. He nodded toward the envelope. Read it, Ellie. It's time. I tore the seal. The paper inside rustled slightly, an orchestra of betrayal in my ears. The letter was short, precise, and utterly devastating. My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, Clara has found something, and I can't keep the truth from you any longer. It starts with the name Henry Silas. Henry Silas was the identity I assumed when I was 24 years old, just 6 months before I met you. He was a man who worked for the same accounting firm, a good man, but a man who died tragically in a small plane crash, a crash that was never publicized outside of a small industry circle. The truth is, I was Henry Silas, the man whose picture is on the expired passport I keep hidden in the attic. That is me. My real name, the one I abandoned, is Thomas Vance. In the spring of 1974, Thomas Vance was facing ruin. My father had passed, leaving me a small, failing brokerage firm, drowning in debt and accusations of fraud. Crimes committed by a senior partner I had trusted. I was cleared by law enforcement, but the industry blackballed me. My future was gone. The Vance name was poison. I had a choice: accept financial and professional annihilation, or disappear. I chose to disappear. I found an opportunity with Henry. He was a bachelor with no close family, and in a terrifying moment of desperation, I took his identity, his social security number, his history, everything, after the crash. I took his life and buried Thomas Vance forever. When I met you as Arthur Hayes, it was still Henry Silas's identity I used. I loved you instantly, Ellie, and I could never bring myself to tell you. I built a clean life for us. The accounting firm I started, that was Seraphim Holdings, the only way I could legally use my old skills. I set up the Belize Trust in Clara's name not to hide money from taxes, but to ensure that if, by some miracle, the Thomas Vance situation ever came back to haunt Arthur Hayes and strip us of our assets, she would have a secure future. It's a safety net I built using the real name on my original documents I had secretly paid to keep active. The man you married, the life we built, the family we cherish, it's all real. But the man who built it started with a lie, not out of malice, but out of fear of losing the chance to ever be good again. I am so sorry. Arthur or Thomas or Henry, I don't even know anymore. I read the words twice. The room, the roast, the children, everything dissolved into a low, buzzing static. Thomas Vance. The name was a phantom, yet it felt more real than Arthur Hayes, the man I had just looked at. 50 years. Our wedding photos, the birth certificates, the tax returns, the little jokes and shared memories, all built on the life of a dead man. I had married a ghost. My hand dropped to my lap, the letter slipping onto the tablecloth, resting right next to the gravy boat. Henry Silas, I whispered, testing the name. Who is Henry Silas, Arthur? My husband, Thomas Vance, collapsed into the chair next to me, his broad shoulders slumping. He was my colleague, he confessed, his voice choked with years of suppressed truth. A good man. I took his social security card after the crash and started over. Arthur Hayes. That was just the closest sound to Henry. I made up the rest. The coffee stain on the tablecloth, I said, pointing a finger at the faint yellow circle I always hid. I have a story about that stain, Arthur. I told you it happened when Clara spilled her milk on our first Easter in this house. Was that a lie too? Was that a different house and a different man and a different child? My voice was rising, sharp and hysterical. No! Eleanor, please, stop, Daniel pleaded, stepping forward and putting a hand on his father's back. The life is real, Mom. The love is real. He had to change his identity. He stole an identity, Daniel, I roared, standing up so fast my chair scraped backward across the hardwood floor. He is an imposter. Who am I? Am I Mrs. Hayes? Or am I Mrs. Silas? Or am I the wife of Thomas Vance, a disgraced broker from 1974? I looked at Clara, my daughter, my champion. Her eyes were full of tears now, the initial anger gone, replaced by the crushing sorrow of the truth. She had known this all along since she found the evidence. The money, Mom, Clara said gently. The Seraphim Holdings Trust. It was set up so that if anyone ever investigated the Henry Silas identity, if the original Thomas Vance charges were somehow resurrected and tied to this man, only the beneficiaries with the original, legal Thomas Vance paperwork could claim the assets. He was trying to protect us from losing everything. He was running a safety protocol for 50 years. He was protecting the lie, I cried, my hands flying up in frustration. He was protecting the identity of Thomas Vance, a name he told me was poison. Every time I introduced him as Arthur, every time I filled out a form, every time I signed the deed to this house, I was an accessory to a colossal 50-year fraud. I felt faint. I had to sit down. My beautiful, perfect Sunday dinner was scattered across the table, worthless. I looked at the roast, the mashed potatoes, the gravy I had worked so hard on, and saw only ash. So, the real shocker, I said, looking at Arthur, who wouldn't meet my gaze. It came from the person I least expected. My husband, the man I trusted with my heart, my life, and my good name, never even told me his real one. I thought about Mr. Henderson, Arthur's old business partner, the one who died. I remembered how withdrawn Arthur had been that week. Was he afraid Henderson would talk? The suspicion was a viper coiling in my gut. Is the death of Henry Silas even real? I asked, the final terrifying question hanging in the air. Or did Thomas Vance kill Henry Silas to take his place? Arthur finally looked up, his eyes wide with horror. Eleanor, no! It was a plane crash. I swear to you, I only saw the opportunity after the obituary. I stood up and walked away. There was no point in finishing the argument. The foundation had crumbled, and all that was left was dust. I walked out of the dining room, past the comforting smell of rosemary, and toward the front door. Mom, wait! Daniel called after me. Where are you going? Arthur begged, rising slowly, heavily from his chair. I turned at the threshold. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm not going to spend another minute in this house with Thomas Vance. I didn't drive far. 73-year-old women with a heart full of betrayal don't usually run off to Mexico. I ended up at the local park, sitting on a bench by the duck pond, watching two mallards argue over a piece of crust. The ordinary scene was a mockery of the extraordinary chaos that had just engulfed my life. I pulled the letter back out of my pocket. Thomas Vance. It sounded dashing, reckless, like a character in a 1940s mystery novel. Arthur Hayes. That sounded like a suburban accountant, which is exactly who he was and who I loved. The man I married was both, but I only got to know one side. The sun began to dip, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. I must have sat there for 2 hours, watching the world move on, while mine stood still, fractured in 2 pieces, B.A., before Arthur, and A.A., after Arthur's confession. My phone buzzed. It was Clara. "I'm coming to get you, Mom. We're at the house. He's a mess. Don't worry about him. Just come home. We need to talk. Home." The word felt like a lie. When Clara pulled up, she didn't say a word about the drama. She simply opened the passenger door, and I got in. The drive back to the house on Maple Street was silent, heavy with shared, unspeakable knowledge. Arthur was sitting alone at the dining room table, the disaster of the abandoned dinner still surrounding him. Daniel was in the kitchen, quietly scraping cold mashed potatoes into the compost bin. It felt like walking onto the set of a play the actors had abandoned. "Eleanor," Arthur said, standing up, his eyes wet and red. "I'm so sorry." "I know sorry isn't enough, but I don't have anything else." "You have a name," I corrected him, my voice flat. "You have Thomas Vance. I want to know who he was, Arthur. Every detail. Not the legal details, the man details. Did he like jazz? Did he hate pineapple? Did he want 4 kids or 2? Because I don't know those things about you, do I?" He nodded, a gesture of absolute surrender. "He was a good man, Ellie. He was just young and reckless and made a mistake of trust. And he loved jazz. Always hated pineapple. He wanted 4 children, but he settled for you and the life we made." Daniel came in, wiping his hands. "Mom, Dad showed me the documentation. The transfer. He did this to protect us. If he had used the Arthur Hayes identity to claim the trust, the whole thing would have collapsed. He was making sure that if his past ever came back, his kids wouldn't be destitute." I looked at my children. They knew. Clara had known for weeks, maybe months. Daniel knew now, and they were defending him. They were defending the man who had lied to me. But then I realized they weren't defending the lie. They were defending the father, the one who loved them, the one who worked hard, the one who had spent 50 years being a good husband and father, all while walking a high-wire act over a chasm of deception. "I don't know how to move past this," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to look at you, Arthur, and not see a stranger." "You don't have to," Clara said, stepping toward me. "You just have to look at the life you built, Mom. You built it. You chose the house, you raised us, you made the roast chicken. He may have brought the wrong name, but you brought the soul." The words were a comfort, but the wound was still gaping. Arthur's final confession that night wasn't about the past. It was about the future. "I've been meaning to tell you something else, Eleanor," he said, taking a shaky breath. "The reason I kept the laptop, the reason I've been so quiet lately. I'm sick. It's early, but the doctor confirmed it last month. It's his suggestion that I put the trust in place now, that I finally tell you the whole truth. If I go, I wanted you to know that the man you loved was real, even if his name wasn't, and I wanted you to be safe." The cancer diagnosis. The final unimaginable twist. The lie was born of fear, and the confession was born of impending loss. I looked at the 3 of them, my 2 children, and the man who was both Arthur and Thomas, my past and my imminent future. The fight drained out of me, leaving only a vast, cold sorrow. This wasn't a plot device. This was my life, a secret spanning 5 decades, revealed in a single painful Sunday dinner, only to be compounded by a diagnosis that put an end date on the chaos. I walked back into the kitchen where Daniel was still clearing the plates, scraping cold gravy and mashed potatoes into the disposal. The sound, the mechanical, hungry churning of the waste, seemed to mirror the churning in my stomach. "Daniel, stop," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Just leave it." He looked at me, his eyes full of the same weary pity Clara had shown earlier. "Mom," he said, setting down the plate, "I can't imagine how you feel." "It's a lot? A lot?" "Daniel, my whole life is a legal fiction," I said, leaning against the counter. "Every anniversary, every Christmas card, every time I stood up and said, 'I, Eleanor, take thee, Arthur,' it was all a fraud on my part, too. I married Henry Silas's identity." Clara came over and put her arms around me, holding me tight. "We're going to face this, Mom, all of us. We'll start by calling him Dad, because that's who he is. And we'll call him Arthur, because that's who he's been to us. The past is messed up, but the man is right there." I went back to the dining room. Arthur hadn't moved. The cold roast chicken still sat in the center of the table. I pulled out my chair and sat down directly across from him. I understand why you lied, Thomas, I said, finally using his real name for the first time. It felt strange, like wearing someone else's coat. I can't forgive it yet, but I understand the fear. I was selfish, he whispered. I wanted a clean slate, and you were the prize. You were the life I stole, and I guarded it jealously. And now you have cancer, I said, stating the fact plainly. And the only person who knows you as Thomas Vance is your daughter, who you were trying to protect from the name. What a terrible irony. I stood up and walked over to him. I smoothed his hair back, examining the tired lines around his eyes. He was still Arthur to me, still the man who loved coffee black and always whistled off-key. The name didn't change the history we shared, only the history before we shared it. I need time, I said. But I'm not leaving you, Thomas. We have one last fight, and we're going to fight it with the truth this time. No more hiding. I pulled him up, and together we finally cleared the table. The roast chicken, the mashed potatoes, the green beans, all went into the trash. The linen tablecloth, stain and all, went into the wash. And the letter from Thomas Vance, now crumpled and tear-stained, I tucked into my own jewelry box. A new piece of our complicated family history. We didn't come out the same on the other side. How could we? But we came out together. I've shared this with you now, sitting here in my kitchen, a year later. I'm wearing my reading glasses, and the house still smells like home, though the Sunday dinners are quieter now. Thomas is frail, but the doctors say the treatment is working, and we are fighting. We sold the old house and downsized, using the proceeds to create a new, perfectly legal trust in my name. The house on Maple Street was a beautiful lie, but the love we share now, in this smaller, simpler home, is fiercely, undeniably real. He still calls me Ellie. I still call him Arthur most of the time. But sometimes, when it's just the two of us, and he's tired, I'll whisper, Thomas, and he'll know I'm speaking to the whole, messy, complicated truth of him. I wonder, after hearing this, what impossible secrets you might have in your own family. Did something like this, a quiet deceit meant for protection, ever shift the ground under your feet? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It helps this old heart feel less alone to know that life's biggest truths are often found in the most unexpected and painful corners.